Each year, tens of thousands of people die from opioid drug overdoses, and millions more suffer from dependency on opioid drugs. It's become a huge problem, widely known as the opioid epidemic or opioid crisis. We hope that by making this video, we can educate even one person about the dangers. Maybe you'll hear something useful that could help somebody in your life. We're fortunate to be joined for this episode by Associate Professor Jennifer Plumb, a pediatric emergency room doctor who works on the front line of the opioid crisis. In addition to working in the ER, she's the medical director of Utah Naloxone, an organization that works to reduce deaths from opioid overdoses.
In 2017, the United States lost 72,000 people to overdose deaths. That's 197 people a day. That's a 737 plane falling out of the sky every single day with no survivors. Hundreds of people are dying at the hands of the little brown bottle that they were prescribed by their doctor. And children, kids of all ages, are getting exposed to these because they're in the homes. And again, there's that misconception that it's safe. It came from a doctor. It's safe.
In this episode, we'll come to understand the nature of the opioid crisis, then learn why the venoms of deadly sea snails are being studied in the search for a solution. But to understand the opioid crisis, we'll first need to understand pain and how pain is treated by the medical profession. We're not just talking about headaches here. We're talking about two main kinds of pain. Firstly, acute pain. The kind you might get following an operation or a serious accident. This kind of pain is generally expected to be short-term, only lasting until the patient recovers. Secondly, chronic pain that can last for months, years, or even the rest of the sufferer's life. This is a huge problem, as globally, over 1.5 billion people suffer from some form of chronic pain. It's chronic pain, in particular, that can change people's lives for the worse.
I very much see the impact that chronic pain and the lack of effective solutions have on the mental health of the people that I'm working with.
Humanity has invented smartphones, musical toilets, and even vehicles that can take them to the moon. But the crucially important invention of some magic pill that could effectively deal with long-term pain still lies beyond us.
Medical professionals have been guided to inquire more frequently of patients to make sure that they're adequately treating pain, but at the same time we don't have an adequate arsenal of medications to be able to treat that pain.
So in cases where the pain is too severe for paracetamol or ibuprofen to handle, what we can prescribe is morphine or other related opioid drugs. Opioids are chemical compounds found in the sap of poppy plants, but that can now also be synthesized artificially. Either way, the basic effects of using opioids remain the same.
We have these receptors in our brain. I kind of think of them like golf tees. And the opioid, like a golf ball, sits right on top of that. And when it triggers it, it causes a couple things to happen. One is that you have pain relief. Two is that you get a euphoria, which is that sense of high that people will describe. And then three, unfortunately, if you have enough of it, you get what's called respiratory depression, which means that your breathing really slows down and unfortunately stops if you have enough of it.
And in certain situations, opioids are great, effective treatments for relieving intense short-term pain.
Someone's just had a terrible trauma. They have a broken bone. Sometimes I work in the ER, a bone out of the skin. These awful, awful traumas, absolutely we need to treat them with that.
The problem is that especially when used in the long term, opioids come with some devastating side effects.
Because people become tolerant to their effects, they have to continue to take more and more. They can become addicted. They can miscalculate in their dosing and inadvertently overdose and die. So there's a lot of associated problems.
So, long-term use of opioids carries huge risks, as well as being ineffective with dealing with long-term pain. Up until fairly recently, their use has been reserved for special circumstances. You may have noticed that we've been focusing on the opioid crisis in Northern America, using images from the USA's Center for Disease Control. This data from the Global Burden of Disease study shows us which other countries are affected the worst by opioid drug-related overdoses, with the darker red countries being the worst affected. As this chart shows, the USA has the highest death rate from opioid drug overdoses.
Where we kind of got off course was in the late 90s and into the early 2000s. A lot of opioid medications were being pushed as non-addictive, and that we could use them for chronic pain and we could use them for any kind of pain. And that was really misguided. That was really not smart because, frankly, they're way too addictive. If I gave you an opioid prescription for, say, 14 days after a procedure or after something, in as little as 7 days, you would feel dependence on that. Meaning that if you stopped it the next day, you'd feel shakes, you'd feel sweatiness, you'd feel awful kind of anxiety and nervousness. But nobody was telling folks about this. It was just sign the prescription, here's your pills, and go. And that continues to this day. There is very little evidence to show that narcotic medicines or opioid medicines are good for chronic pain. Yet we have 2+ million people in America taking these medications for chronic pain. And once you've been on them for longer than even that 7 day, to come off of it is really difficult.
Pretty much just like any kid in junior high and stuff that wanted to fit in. Started drinking and stuff at a younger age at parties and stuff like that. Around 18, I got in a bullet bike accident and was prescribed OxyContin and became addicted to pain medication. My prescription ran out and I got sick, so I started doing heroin in turn to deal with the opiate withdrawals.
In recent years, medical prescription of opioids has massively increased, and with it, deaths from opioid overdoses.
And I thought I just went to sleep. And when I woke up, all I remember is just seeing like 7 police officers standing around me and my mom standing there like crying. The first thought was that I knew I overdosed. Right then I knew instantly. And I could just tell like the look on my mom's, the first thing I thought of was that look on my mom's face, like that fear, like she just looked like she just saw a ghost.
Some pharmaceutical companies have been accused of intentionally getting patients hooked on opioid medications so that they could profit from the sales of their drugs.
If you haven't read Dreamland by Sam Quinones, read it. It's fascinating because it talks about what happened in the 90s with a drug company called Purdue Pharmaceuticals actually approaching this as an advertising mission. We have a product. We want to increase our sales of this product. How do we do that? And it was really effective. Look where we are now. And they pushed all kinds of strategies to physicians, to healthcare systems, and as well as in the print media for the general public to say this is a non-addictive opiate. This will help your patients. This will help improve your quality of life. You should get it. You should ask your doctor to write it. And likewise to doctors, you should provide this to your patients. And it was a flat-out, bold-faced lie. There is no such thing as a non-addictive opiate, period.
It's sickening, and many lawsuits are now coming out against the companies involved.
Well, now you go bigger to the pharmaceutical companies, and nationwide there are a ton of lawsuits that are being launched. I don't know the legal terms. I've heard class action lawsuit thrown around, which is much like what happened with tobacco lawsuits and legislation.
U.S. President Donald J. Trump went as far as declaring the opioid crisis a public health emergency due to the scale of the problem back in 2017. While Killer Cures follows the story of the development of new medical alternatives to opioids derived from cone snail venoms, it's important to stress that organizations like Utah Naloxone are providing solutions that can prevent avoidable opioid overdose deaths right now. We encourage you to watch the videos at utahnaloxone.org as they contain information that could save your life or the life of someone you care about. So, in order to effectively replace opioids, we need to find a drug with two elusive qualities. It must effectively treat long-term pain, and people who use it must not form dependencies on it. The good news? Scientists have already gotten close. Prialt, short for primary alternative, as in the primary alternative to opioids, is a pain relief drug originally extracted from the venom of a magician cone snail. Crucially, its mechanism for pain relief is different to opioids.
The targets for this compound are in the periphery. They're not in the brain, so there's not that possibility of reinforcing effects in the brain.
Prialt does not cause the euphoria or addiction that opioids cause. It also does not require ever-increasing doses to be effective, meaning that it perfectly fits our description for the ideal pain relief drug. But it wasn't quite perfect. Prialt has to be injected directly into the central nervous system, a delicate procedure that can only really be performed in a hospital setting for people who have no alternatives and for whom opioids like morphine no longer work. In response to the opioid crisis, the hunt for a non-opioid painkiller has become really important. So while Prialt isn't widely used today, it proved that cone snails could be the source of new painkillers. This was a concept so important that the US government provided special funding for its research.
Fortunately, we did get funded as part of the US government effort to address the opioid crisis. It turns out we were in a good spot because one of the conus venom components has become a drug for pain, and it acts by a non-opioid mechanism. And so we had, a track record. This was a reasonable source to look.
With over 1,000 species of cone snail, each one armed with 200 plus different biologically active conopeptides, it's a mammoth task. But there are some promising leads already.
So this particular peptide comes from a cone snail called Conus regius. And one of the things that's particularly exciting about the cone snail peptide is it doesn't just mask the pain, but seems to also be disease modifying.
Apart from being used to treat pain, the research offers hope for treatments that could accelerate and improve the healing process.
What we're finding with some of these compounds is that they accelerate the healing process and prevent some of the ongoing pathology associated with it. So our hope is that, in essence, more people will be cured from the underlying causes, so they won't go on to have years and years of chronic pain and be in need of the opioids in the first place.
In the next installment of Killer Cures, we'll see exactly how all this promising research into cone snail venom is being carried out. From snail hunting in the depths of tropical Filipino seas to the latest techniques in molecular neuroscience being used in the USA.
At this point, you can think of the conotoxin as a string of beads. You will be able to identify, using differences in mass, the exact amino acid sequence of your conotoxin.
That about wraps it up for this episode of Killer Cures with me, Max Taylor. I hope you've enjoyed watching it, and I'll see you in the next episode for more Killer Cures.